What is your most prized possession? Seriously, of everything that you have, your possessions, what do you value the most? If you had to start selling things and dispose of your property, what would be the last few things you would be holding on to? That would really give you an idea of what you actually prize. I can tell you that my wife and I went through some financial troubles about 12 years ago. One of the last things I was willing to let go of was my motorcycle. Gives you an idea. If there was a fire in your home, what would you be trying to salvage first, if anything, right? Well, there was a survey performed last year that asked people this question: what is your most prized possession? And the survey results were broken down by gender to see if there were differences, and if so, what were they, between men and women. Among women, the top 5 possessions were family photos, number 1. Number 2 was just the home itself. 3 was a wedding ring, quickly followed by an engagement ring, and then a family pet. Those among the things that they had were their most prized possessions. Family, the actual people, it was assumed would be fine. Among men, very, very similar. I was actually impressed. Home was number 1. Number 2 was family photos. That surprised me. I thought it would be the car, but that was number 3. Then came the wedding ring, and after that, the family pet. A little bit of difference in the ordering, but it was the same things that were there. What was your answer? And I addressed the question to you. This article went on to rank many other things that people possess, and they don't hold as valuable as these first 5. Things like computers, clothes, telephones or mobile phones, books, record or CD collection, those were on the list. Televisions were on the list. Even internet access was on the list for men. But they were seen as much less valuable in comparison. The point of the article was that accompanied this survey was that knowing what you value in your home and making sure that you have appropriate protection in place in the event something goes wrong is very important. You can't put a price on something sentimental. So take steps to look after your most prized possessions and protect them. That was the point of the article. Now, these are the things that people in society around us value, and they have made a distinction among their possessions. And recognizing what we find most valuable in this life and have set apart from other things, from other possessions, can be helpful as well. It makes it a lot easier to make decisions when we're confronted with choices and decisions later. Likewise, recognizing what God has set aside, what He has set apart, and what He values helps us tremendously. So I want to go through a list here, a sequence of essentially 3 things that God has set aside, set apart, and that He values. We're going to start right in Genesis 1:1, right at the very beginning, because these are a sequence of things that one leads to the next. Genesis 1:1, it's in the very first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In this verse, the earth itself is set aside from everything else that He created at that point. There's all the heavens and the earth. He set it aside for His purpose of creating His family. So that's the first thing. We don't know what surprises God has in store for the future in the rest of the heavens, but at this point in time, the earth is set apart. Over the course of the first chapter of Genesis, we see God lighting up the earth, dividing the waters, making dry land appear, bringing forth plants on the earth, setting the sun, the moon, the planets, the stars in a particular pattern. And we see animal life brought forth to the planet, first in the seas and then the air, and then on land. And each time God looks at His possessions, His creation, and He says it is good. After all of this, God goes into detail on creating man. And unlike the rest of the work that He performed, He ties man to Himself, stating, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness." There's a connection here that He is establishing. So in comparison to what is shared with the rest of what God had made this week, man is unique and given a unique place in ruling over everything else on the earth. At the end of every other day, he said it is good. After man was created, looking at all of creation, he said it is very good. So we see that God has set apart the earth from the rest of the universe, and that on earth he set mankind apart for a unique role. Most of society around us denies God because they want the freedom to behave in any fashion they desire. So by denying God, they deny the unique role that God has given to mankind and the responsibility that man has under God. If they aren't responsible for those things, they can go do whatever they want. Recognizing that we have a responsibility to God lays out our behavior and our actions. So think about that list of prized possessions again that people have. The possessions are only prized because they fulfill their purpose as it relates to the owners. When they do fulfill their purpose, when they do not fulfill their purpose, they're no longer prized. Think about if a home burns down or is lost. People don't prize that home any longer. Well, the same is true of mankind. People who do not fulfill God's intended purpose are not prized possessions. Let's move on to the second item, the Sabbath. The Sabbath was set apart. Let's go to Genesis 2, and we'll look at something else that God has set apart here. We're going to spend quite a bit of time in this topic here. So starting in verse 1, Genesis 2:1. Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. And then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested. He's repeating himself. He wants to make sure that everyone's getting the idea. I rested on the seventh day. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, set it apart, because in it he rested from all of his work. In verse 3, the word sanctified comes from the Hebrew word kadesh. Please turn to Exodus 20. We're going to dig a little deeper into this word and how it's used in the Bible. You know that this rest in Genesis is the basis of the fourth commandment, in which God had set aside the Sabbath day for observance. So Exodus 20. And there's a purpose for this. Okay. Exodus 20 and verse 8, I believe. Yes, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, neither your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. Pointing back to Genesis, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. You're very familiar with that particular commandment. I read it all because the word kadesh is actually in here. The commandment does start by recognizing that the day is already holy. And it ends by making the very same point. The day is holy, both at the beginning and the end. God doesn't want mankind to make a mistake, yet they do. It doesn't say that it's holy to God. It says it's holy, period. That's it. So this keeping it holy and made it holy, it's this very same word in Hebrew. And in both cases, that word is kadesh. It's the very same word we saw in Genesis. So, by keeping the Sabbath holy, we are kadeshing it. There's a reason why I'm using the Hebrew here. It develops a little bit further here. So, hang with me. Now, kadesh, it's a verb. It's meant to describe action. Even the resting part is a verb, and it is an action. The commandment implies that observing the Sabbath involves activity of some sort, It's a day of rest from our labors, but it is a day that involves action. There is a noun in the Hebrew that is closely related, also very, very similar. It's Kodesh. So there's Kadesh and Kodesh. Again, there's a reason why I'm pulling out the Hebrew, so hang with me here. Now, Kodesh, it's a noun used to describe the state of things such as holy garments of Aaron, a holy crown, holy anointing oil, which are phrases that we do see in the Old Testament. In those cases, it's Kodesh. So with this background, let's start looking at another question. Am I putting my shoes on God's holy Sabbath? Please turn to Exodus 3, and you'll see why I'm asking that question. Exodus 3. It's a day that's set apart. Let's explore a little deeper. Exodus 3, and verse 2. This passage comes right after Moses has fled Egypt, and now he's in Midian tending to the sheep with his father, or of his father-in-law Joseph. And he comes on a peculiar sight at Mount Horeb. So verse 2. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire within a bush. And Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. Verse 4, when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from the bush, said, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. Now, Moses didn't know at this point that he was about to have a heart-to-heart discussion with God. And for the next 1.5 chapters of Exodus, he's getting detailed instruction right from God. But before that instruction comes, there's an interesting exchange. Verse 5, do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Yes, that's Kodesh, holy ground. It's Kodesh. Moses, take off your sandals. Why? The implication is that when you come to ground that is Kodesh, holy, you should remove your shoes. Before Moses could receive the instruction, he had to remove his shoes. It's interesting, right? I was really curious about the aspect of the shoe and the instruction, and I found that many other people in other cultures also find it an interesting point. There's a number of traditions from the ancient world that still exist even today. You can find in the Muslims and the Hindus, when they go to worship, they actually take off their shoes. It seems to have been a custom that comes out right out of the ancient world. Brethren, we often describe the Sabbath as an appointment with God. We call it holy time, Kodesh. And it's set apart from the working week to receive instruction, just like Moses was about to receive here. When it comes to the Sabbath, are we metaphorically removing our shoes in preparation for instruction? When I first learned about this many years ago, about 12 years ago at the feast during a message, it really stuck with me, and I now evaluate a lot of the things that I do on the Sabbath in this context. All right, let's go back to Moses again. All right, so God spoke to Moses, said, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground, Kodesh ground. Any place that God is, he is sovereign. That's what made it holy. God was there. And Moses was walking up to God for the very first time, and God was letting Moses know what the relationship was going to be. When one is on Kodesh ground, the appropriate Kadesh is to remove one's shoes. Do you think I'm going out on a limb here? Joshua 5. Let's turn to Joshua 5. Joshua 5. After they enter the promised land, they're about to march up on Jericho. Remember that the waters had stacked up, allowing them to cross the river. 12 stones were removed from the riverbed. The men were circumcised, and they waited a period of time to heal. But they were moving to Jericho. Joshua 5, verse 13. And it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, a man stood opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" Verse 14, so he said, "No, but as commander of the Lord of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Joshua fell on his face, says, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" Joshua got it immediately. He knew who he was in front of. And he dropped to his knees because he knew that was appropriate, and he asked for instruction. Verse 15, then the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, he didn't say, go march around the city 7 times. That came later, right? What's the first thing he says? Take off your sandal from your foot, for the place you stand is holy. It's the first thing he says. And Joshua did so. In Joshua 1:3, there is a statement that says, every place that the sole of your foot will tread, I have given to you. I always thought that was interesting that they're coming to Jericho and they're walking through, and God has already made a promise. Every place where the sole of your foot treads, I'll give to you. So in verse 15, again, the word holy, it's Kodesh. Joshua, remove your sandal. It's the same question as for Moses. Why? Because the ground is holy. When you come to ground that is Kodesh, remove your shoes. All right, let's go a little further. Exodus 16:4. Exodus 16:4. Exodus 16:4 indicates that the Sabbath is a test from God. Starting in verse 4, then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. The test is, will man keep the day holy? Will we, and I'm going back to the Hebrew, will we Kadesh the Sabbath? Will we keep it holy? Turning away from our labors and turning to God's instruction. If we're engaged in physical labor, most people that want to keep their toes will have shoes on. Think about some examples from the Bible. At one point, a man was discovered picking up sticks on the Sabbath. Most likely he was wearing shoes. People who try to gather manna on the Sabbath, going out looking for it, most likely were wearing shoes. On the other hand, it's possible to turn aside from physical labor and still not keep the Sabbath holy. So it's not simply removing one's shoes. To keep the Sabbath holy, we must be focused on receiving instruction from God. And just be clear, I am not saying that we should not wear shoes on the Sabbath. Please wear your shoes. But Moses and Joshua were told to remove their shoes when they were in the presence of God and about to receive instruction. But we don't see that same instruction to Abraham and Jacob. So, something to keep in mind. I have found that this connection and the way that Kadesh and Kodesh are used to be helpful when evaluating Sabbath keeping, the activities that I want to partake in. The sovereign of the Sabbath is God. He is in the Sabbath. He created it. He made it holy. It belongs to him. When we are observing the Sabbath, striving to observe it, let's ask ourselves, are we metaphorically putting on our shoes on God's Sabbath? Like I said, I've used it a lot. Let's go to Isaiah 58 as we start to conclude here. Isaiah 58, go to verse 13. Because we see these ideas connected again. Which shows you that we're not going out on a limb by looking at this connection of the shoes, the foot, and the Sabbath keeping. Isaiah 58, verse 13. If you turn away your foot from my Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, holy, it's Kodesh. Absolutely, same idea. Remember that list of prized possessions that people set apart from other things? That was a list of things that they valued and treated differently from other things. They were set apart. So the question is, are we setting apart the Sabbath day from other days in the way that we use it? God's about to give us a list here of criteria that we can use to answer that question. 58, continuing on here, Isaiah 58:13, continuing. And call the Sabbath a delight, the holy day of the Lord honorable. I know that many people have customs of things that they do on the Sabbath to create a sense of delight of the Sabbath. I know many families have things that they do on the Sabbath, certain meals, I've seen a family that brought out the same china on a Friday night, and that was all that they used, the only time that they would use it. A lot of people will go to an effort to make sure that their children look at the Sabbath as a delight, so that when they're growing up, they don't see it as an onerous thing. It's something that is pleasurable in the sense of following God. Continuing on, and shall honor him, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure. And a lot of commentaries indicate pleasure here would be better translated as business or affairs, right? Nor speaking your own words, but you shall delight yourself in the Lord, and I will cause you to ride high on the high hills of the earth, and feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father, and the mouth of the Lord has spoken. He's tying these ideas together. So the Sabbath is holy time, and God's given us has given us a set of criteria here that helps us to evaluate if something is appropriate. We are not to trample on the Sabbath by doing our own ways, going on a journey, a rest from the ways of work are things that I found in the commentaries. Not finding our own pleasure, meaning business or affairs, and avoiding everyday affairs. The Sabbath should not be like the other days of the week. So the Sabbath day has been set apart. It is holy Kadesh time. And for the sake of time, I'm going to skip the third section I had, but I'll summarize it in this way. The church of God is set apart as well. The church of God is holy. If we brought the Hebrew into the Greek, in the many places where it says sanctified, it would also be Kadesh or Kodesh. It would be the same. There's a number of other things in the Bible which are also listed as set apart. But those three things, starting with the creation, earth being set apart, and then the Sabbath where we receive instruction that continues the creation, the instruction from God, the instruction in us where we are set apart through God's Holy Spirit and becoming more like him. So, in your list of prized possessions, I certainly hope that God's instruction is among your prized possessions, unlike the people of this world.